In this video, I'm going to examine a Python program that unpacks a list argument. In other words, I'm going to trace the execution of the program and try and predict what the output's going to be. Now, the computer program is shown here, and you will have seen this in the previous video. What we have is a function where this is the signature of the function, and you can see it's expecting to receive 3 parameters. This is the mechanics of the function, and it has a selection construct, and it has this which returns a value. On this line, we've got a list that contains 36, 10, and 2. On this line, this bit of the code is responsible for invoking this function, because if you look at this name, you can see it's the same name as the name of the function here. And on this line, we print what's returned to this variable weekly wage, because you can see this inside the print statement. And the output from this, well, it's going to be 370. And I'm going to have a look at tracing this program so we can see that, in fact, for the data we've got here, when this program executes, we're going to see that the output from it is 370. Now you can see on this line I've created a list that contains 36, 10, and 2, and they correspond to the hours worked by an employee, the rate of pay they get per hour, and their overtime rate. And because this is 2, it means they're on double time. If you now consider the next line, you can see that I am invoking gross pay, and I'm passing it the details. I'm passing it this list, but note here I have got an asterisk. Now what that's going to do, it's going to unpack this list into separate elements, and I'm going to illustrate that by these numbers appearing here. So we've broken down the list into these separate elements. This is how I like to think of it when the asterisk is in front of the name of a list. Now these 3 elements are now passed appropriately to the parameters defined in the signature of the function, as you can see illustrated now. The 36 has been assigned to hours worked, the 10 has been assigned to the hourly rate, and the 2 has been assigned to the overtime rate. Now we can turn our attention to the first program statement within the function, and you can see here that we're asking the question, is the hours worked greater than or equal to 35? Well, you can see above that the hours worked is 36. Consequently, if you consider this conditional statement where you're asking is one thing bigger than something else, or at least equal to it, in this case 36 is greater than 35, so this turns out to be true. In which case, because we have a selection construct here, this is executed, and the code following the else is not executed. So the next program statement to execute is this, where the hours worked, which we know is 36, has 35 subtracted from it. Now that is because an employee is expected to work 35 hours a week. If they work 36, they are working overtime. So here you can see we're subtracting from 36, 35, which gives 1. So 1 is assigned to the overtime hours. And I'll put a little 1 here to remind us that the overtime hours has just been calculated to be 1. We then come on to this line, which takes the hourly rate, which is 10, and multiplies it by the 35, which is 350. So that is assigned to normal pay. So I'll put 350 here to remind us that normal pay has just been worked out to be 350. Then we execute this line of code, and you can see what it is doing is getting the overtime hours, which we know is 1 from here. We're multiplying it by the hourly rate, which was what was passed in as a parameter. And then we're multiplying that by the overtime rate, which we know was passed in here as 2. So this calculation becomes 1 times 10 times 2, which is 20. So the overtime pay now is 20. And I'll put a 20 here to remind us of that. This is the next line to execute, where you can see we're going to be returning the addition of the normal pay plus the overtime pay, which you can see we calculated to be 350 and 20 respectively. Now I like to think as this as returning, in this case, the 370 to this position, where it is then assigned to weekly wage. And this line then prints out the weekly wage, which should be printing out 370. So if we look at the runtime, we should see that the output is 370, as you can clearly see it is here. Now I'd like to leave you with an exercise. This is the computer program we've been considering in this video, and I've traced it to predict what the output's going to be. And if you look at the program, you can see that I've got in this position here the fact that the employee worked 36 hours. What I'd like you to have a go at is altering this 36, as you can see on this slide, to 34. Trace the program, predict what the output's going to be, and trace it in a similar way to the way in which I did it in this video. Now, in the next video in the playlist, I'll show you the trace when this figure has been changed from the 36 to the 34.